So Xiaomi is a company that's well known for making really good value devices, so much so that every time I've reviewed any kind of fitness tracker from the likes of Garmin or from Fitbit, there's usually tons of comments down below from people saying, what about the Mi Band? It can do everything that those devices can, but for a fraction of the price. And it's also true when it comes to smartphones. Xiaomi makes a whole host of really impressively powerful and well-designed phones, considering the very low asking prices in many cases. So the Redmi Note 5 is the sequel to the Redmi Note 4, which was India's best-selling phone last year, owing largely to the fact that it could do so much for such a low asking price. The Note 5 Pro is a slightly more premium and feature-packed version of the Note 5, and I'm going to be looking at them both here, but focusing predominantly on the Note 5 Pro because that one's much more exciting, it has a lot more cool features, and it's still incredibly good value. So just what kind of great value can Xiaomi offer here? Well, I thought a fun experiment would be to use the phone for a bit, the Redmi Note 5 Pro, to see how I found it and whether I enjoyed using it, and then to give it a price that I thought would be fair for that device that I'd be willing to pay. I've been watching too much For and a Bed apparently.
We would expect to pay £50.
Good heavens.
And then I'd look up the price and see how far off the mark I was. So I gave this device a price that I would be happy to pay of 400 quid. And then I looked up and found that it was actually 13,999 rupees. And that actually equates to about 150 quid, so significantly cheaper. To put that into perspective, that's about $215, whereas I thought it was worth about $550. So that's very impressive, but it's not perfect and it might not be for you. So let's take a look at where it cut corners and where it manages to excel at such a low asking price. So this is the Redmi Note 5 Pro. In terms of the design, I think it makes a pretty good first impression. I really like this sheen on it. It's made from aluminium, so it feels good quality and weighty in the hand. It's got nice curves to it. The dual lens here is quite iPhone-ish. The front, on the other hand, I find a little bit uninspired. It's quite flat, quite white, and it doesn't really stand out. I think this is a nicely made phone, but if you're coming from something really premium, oh hello, if you're coming from something really premium, I don't think that it's going to blow your socks off. That said, what is quite impressive for a budget device is the aspect ratio. This is an 18:9 aspect ratio. The screen is 5.99 inches, but it still manages to be nice and slim in the hand and easy to use with one hand. So that's a very big plus, and it's great to see on a more budget device. It's not bezel-less, but they're nice slim bezels, and that gives it a slightly more 2018 look. The screen itself is an IPS LCD display. It's full HD. It has really good colors. It's got good viewing angles, nice brightness. You can view it well in direct sunlight, in dark settings. So on the whole, it's great for viewing media, and it gets a win in that column. One negative in terms of the screen though is that it uses an unspecified version of Gorilla Glass, and I have noticed that mine's already picked up some light scratches and scuffs. Of course, you can mitigate this by using a screen protector, but not everyone likes those, so that's up to you. And part of the reason that it's able to offer that nice big screen while still having decent performance is that it's packing the Snapdragon 636. This is the first phone to debut that chipset. This means that you should get great performance across most apps. Swiping through multiple apps, multitasking isn't a problem. I'm using the 4GB of RAM variant, but it also comes with 6GB of RAM, which of course should provide even better memory management, etc. On the whole, you should find that day-to-day use is perfectly fine. I have had it stutter a couple of times and freeze up a couple of times, but again, for the price, performance is very nippy. The graphics are provided by an Adreno 509 GPU, and this should be ample for the majority of games and experiences on the Play Store with decent performance and frame rates. Of course, you're not going to be competing with those top-end devices when it comes to benchmark scores, but for real-world use, that doesn't really matter. So the screen's really good for the price and the performance is okay, but another real standout feature is the battery. You're getting a 4,000 mAh battery here, which of course means excellent longevity, long time between charges. I'm getting roughly 9 hours of screen on time, which is fantastic. With moderate to even slightly heavy use, you can often get 1.5 to 2 days without having to charge, so that's all great. One downside is micro USB, which is starting to feel really outdated at this point. It also means slower transfer speeds, of course. And whilst it does in theory support quick charge, apparently you don't get an actual quick charger in the box, so you'll have to play around with that yourself. Really though, having a 4000 mAh battery is a really nice feature on a budget device, on any device. I love being able to watch YouTube without worrying about sapping my power. I love being able to leave WhatsApp open so that I can respond to messages whilst I'm working. That's a really cool feature. It's something I'd like to see on more high-end devices, definitely. But what Xiaomi, ooh, I wonder why it's got scratches. But what Xiaomi really wants to promote is the camera. In fact, they're calling this India's camera beast, whatever that means. At the rear, you get a 12 megapixel primary shooter backed up by a 5 megapixel secondary lens. And the reasoning behind that secondary lens is so that you can pull off those bokeh effects, those portrait mode photos that are so in vogue at the moment. Around the front, you get a very generous 20 megapixel lens, which is perfect for taking very sharp and crisp looking selfies. In terms of general performance, the camera is somewhat mixed, and I wouldn't say it necessarily lives up to the title of camera beast. In fact, I'm not sure that any phone would live up to that title. The amount of detail in shots is good, but they can look a little bit washed out, and white balance isn't great. You get those grey, dull looking skies, and scenery doesn't look quite as eye-popping as it does on a flagship device. Of course, it's not fair to compare this with a flagship device. The price is very different, but I personally find the Honor 7X, which is only slightly more expensive, to have a more interesting and impressive camera if you're willing to put in the work. The app is also a little bit uninspiring. For instance, there's a manual mode, but it actually only gives you 2 different options to change the white balance and the ISO, so that could definitely be improved. That bokeh effect is similarly hit or miss. In some photos it can look fantastic with nicely blurred out backgrounds, looks like you've been to a professional photo shoot, but in other photos the edge detection isn't so good and you might lose an ear as though you were being painted by Van Gogh. There's also a portrait mode on the front-facing camera, which obviously is entirely digital, but this is more miss than hit, so I'd say give that one a miss. Really though, at the moment, I think portrait mode on a device this expensive is almost always going to be more of a gimmick than something you actually end up using a lot, and it's certainly fun to have it there. It's nice to play around with, and especially something that isn't present on a lot of other cameras. Video here is also something of a mixed bag. There's no optical stabilization, but electronic stabilization is really quite impressive actually. The big letdown is that you can only record at 1080p and 30 frames per second, even though the chipset and the lens should support 4K. And in fact, if you download a third-party app like Open Camera, then you can access the 4K filming that your camera is natively able to perform. The only thing is then you lose the stabilization. So this is something I'd like to see in a future update. Otherwise, quality of life and other features on this device are actually pretty good on the whole. So you've got fingerprint unlocking, which works really well. There's also face detection, which is surprisingly quick, although Xiaomi themselves admit that it's not very secure, so depends on whether you want speed or security. There's an IR blaster, which I'm really happy to see make a return. It never gets old turning off televisions and frustrating people. Why don't manufacturers include this in their phones anymore? There's also a headphone jack, speaking of those backwards facing features. Not all progress is forwards, as they say. Obviously that's going to make a lot of people very happy. In terms of storage, you get either 32GB or 64GB, depending on whether you choose the 4GB or 6GB of RAM variant. There is expandable storage, and there's also dual SIM, but you can't do both at the same time. So either you'll have a SIM and a hybrid SIM, or a SIM and an SD card, but there should be some setup there, some combination that most people are happy with. By the way, the 6 and 64GB edition is 16,999 Indian rupees versus 13,999. One unfortunate letdown on the other hand though is that this is still running Android Nougat 7.1, which is a bit of a shame at this point. Hopefully there's an update rolled out soon. To be honest, my Galaxy S8 Plus is still running Nougat as well. Here in the UK, we're just used to that kind of thing. It also comes with a skin called MIUI 9, which I know some people like, but personally I'm not a huge fan. I don't think it adds that much other than a few widgets and things. Apparently there's speed optimizations, but I'm not seeing it myself personally. I would prefer to see stock Android on here, and up-to-date stock Android at that. But on the whole, I think that's a pretty darn good showing for the price. So for considerably less than 200 quid, you're getting an 18:9 ratio, a big full HD screen, you're getting a dual lens camera, you get a 4000 mAh battery, and an IR blaster. But on the downside, betraying its status as a budget end device, you've got Android 7, you've got a skin over the top which you may or may not like, and a camera that produces slightly washed out photos, and a lower end chipset in there. Aesthetically, it won't turn heads, and you can get some more premium looking devices, even at the lower end of the price spectrum from the likes of HMD. They've got some really nice stuff on the way. But if you're happy with those compromises, then there's no denying that this really is good value for money. And in terms of the performance and the features, it's right up there with the best. Those flagship manufacturers are going to really have to watch their backs if they want to keep justifying those price hikes. And if you want to save even more money, then you have the option of the Redmi Note 5 Not Pro. So this is a very similar device in terms of the looks. It's still 18:9, still got the same 5.99 inch screen, the same resolution. The camera on the back is single lens, of course, but it's very similar. It's still 12 megapixels, got the same aperture, etc. Photos are still great in terms of detail, but a little bit washed out. On the front, you get a big downgrade. It's only 5 megapixels, but the video recording on the rear-facing camera is actually an upgrade. You can record in 4K on this one, which is a bit strange, but it does inspire hope that there will be 4K video recording on the Pro soon with an update. The chipset is a downgrade. It's the Snapdragon 65 with the Adreno 506 GPU, and you might notice this browsing through the UI. It's starting to get a little bit older, and you've got to think in terms of future-proofing. For most people, if you're picking between these two devices, it's worth spending just that little bit more to get the 5 Pro, and there's enough features and performance improvements to make that worthwhile. If I had to pick a budget device myself though, I think I'd still only just go with the Honor 7X, only because I really like all those camera features and the design a little bit more. But again, there's more and more great options for budget phones, and the future's looking very bright for this price category. So thanks a ton for watching, guys. I hope you found this video useful and interesting. If you did, then please leave a like, please share it around, that helps us immensely. Please subscribe to the channel if you want more like this, and comment down below to let me know what you think of the Redmi Note 5 Pro and the Redmi Note 5 Not Pro. Of course, check out AndroidAuthority.com, for we are your source for all things Android.